Thank you and good evening. We are the Federal City Brass Band. We represent what a regimental brass band would have looked like between 1861 and 1865. Of course, the regimental bands at that time were basically the town bands, brass bands of every town, city, municipality throughout the United States. When their regiment was formed and went off to war, they naturally brought along their brass band, and that's who we like to represent. Our first number, or two numbers of course, were Rally Round the Flag, also known as the Battle Cry of Freedom, and then Yankee Doodle. Our next number comes from the band books of the 25th Massachusetts Band. This is the Battle Hymn Quickstep. It's, of course, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Has a couple of stanzas, strains that are played before we get to that familiar tune that we all know. The Battle Hymn Quickstep. And now a little salute to our mounted friends. This next piece was written by a person who wrote so many pieces for brass band during the Civil War, a fellow by the name of Claudio Gruffalo. He was the John Philip Sousa of the Civil War before there was a John Philip Sousa. By the way, John Philip Sousa was around. He was just a little kid. He was about 10 years old in 1864. And of course, he would have heard music like this performed. Certainly heard many Gruffalo pieces and probably patterned his early marches after this great writer. This salute to our mounted friends is a piece called the Cavalry Quickstep. And in it, you'll hear some bugle calls played by the cornets. It's a great little piece. Hope you enjoy it. brass bands of that time period, of course, were made of brass, and they look a little different than those instruments that you see today. All the instruments, by the way, on the stage date from the mid-19th century period. And if you have perfect pitch, you'll notice that we are playing a little higher. Standard pitch is A440. We're playing it around A453. That's why these horns were pitched that way. But instruments were made up of the E-flat cornets, and they were rotary valved instruments. We have a top action and a side action rotary valve, just like on modern French horns. And then the E-flat, by the way, plays the melody. And we have the B-flat cornet, rotary valve instrument. Then our alto horns, the equivalent of today's French horns. We have them in two kind of configurations. We have them with the bell going up. The cornets, of course, have the bell going in front, but we also have one with the bell going up and one with the bell going back. More on that in just a moment. We have our tenor horns. Okay, good. And we have not only rotary valves, but they did have piston valves back then. And then the tenor tuba, or the baritone horn. You got one there? Oh, good. Okay, we have our baritone horn. And then, of course, at the bottom, we have our E-flat bass horn, providing the fundamental to the band. And, of course, the drum section, which provides that rhythmic beat to all our marches. Now, you'll notice that we have some instruments that have the bell going to the back. Gentlemen, to the back. Play. Hold it. There we go. And there's a reason for that. It's because bands marched in front of the troops, and the troops loved hearing the music. So this is sort of an American invention during the Civil War. They would make these horns so that the bells would go to the back to make it easier for the music to be heard. We're going to feature musician Richard Demme on one piece right now. This is we're going to slow things down and play a piece written by George Root. George Root was a composer of some really wonderful music during the Civil War, and one of the pieces he wrote was a selection called The Vacant Chair. And it was in honor, of course, of those who didn't make it home. And there were many, many scenes throughout the United States, as there is today with our soldiers who are off in faraway lands, where you would have a table setting and you would have an empty chair. And George Root wrote the lyrics, "We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be a vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him while we breathe our evening prayer. When a year ago we gathered, joy was in his mild blue eye. But a golden cord is severed, and our hope in ruin lie." It's a very sad tune, but we're going to have a lovely rendition of this by our tenor horn player, Richard Demme. This is the George Root tune, The Vacant Chair. Richard Demme on euphonium or tenor horn. I slipped and said euphonium, and I hope I don't jinx this, but Richard is going to be auditioning for the United States Air Force Band in a few weeks. So I know we have a lot of Air Force folks here today, so I know that they'll all be thinking about him. The audition process has gotten very tough these days with the bands, military bands accepting the very top players, and we're very thankful that Richard is playing with us. And we're going to hate to see him go if he gets the job, but he will be wearing a blue uniform, and that's kind of good. Oh, now my favorite part of the program. Time to feature the bugle. And the bugle, of course, was very important during the Civil War. Not used in brass bands, the bugle was part of the field music. The fifers and the drummers and the buglers, whose specific job was to tell time in camp, when to get up, when to go to sleep, when to go to eat, when to fall in, when to have drill. And then, of course, used on the battlefield, very important for soldiers to be told when to go forward, when to come back, when to lie down, when to get up, when to go to the left, when to go to the right, when to commence firing, and when to cease fire. All those things I just said had a certain bugle call associated with it. And soldiers trained to those calls every single day. Well, Claudio Gruffalo, that great writer of the time period, decided he was going to incorporate some of those bugle calls into a piece of music that he wrote for the 7th New York Regiment. And we're going to play that for you right now. It's a piece called Manual of Arms Polka. And what it does is that it utilizes some of the calls heard by that regiment. Some of the calls are not in the manual per se, but they were probably used by that regiment. And then, so you'll hear the bugle play some of these calls answered by the band. And then the very last piece, the last section of this piece, is a very special piece that was associated with the 7th New York Regiment. It's a piece called Touch the Elbow. And that song was very important to soldiers because it was about going into battle and knowing that your comrade was next to you, that you could always reach out and touch the elbow of the fellow next to you, and that you knew that would give you confidence in battle. So this is the Manual of Arms Polka for bugle and brass band. Thank you very much. We really enjoyed being here. It's our second year here. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Federal City Brass, it's too easy to go onto the internet, which I understand is going to be a big thing 150 years from now, and look up the Federal City Brass Band. We also have a number of videos on YouTube and a couple CDs. So if you're interested, you can always find us there. We're going to end our little selection with Red, White, and Blue, which is also known as Columbia Gem of the Ocean, followed by our little march off to Battle Hymn of the Republic.